Lupin III Steal Napoleon's Dictionary, also known simply as Napoleon's Dictionary, is the third animated Lupin TV special which first aired in August 1991. With the previous TV specials performing strongly in the ratings, the same writer and director team of Hiroshi Kashiwabara and Osamu Dezaki went back to create another full-length story. Though Dezaki's role may have been more reserved this time, as he's only credited as an animation supervisor, and, in fact, no one is officially credited as the director for this film. It's likely that Dezaki did direct it, but he was handling a number of other projects at this time, and his role may have been more akin to a supervisor rather than an actual director. Now, why exactly would nobody get an official credit for directing Napoleon's Dictionary? We don't know for sure, but I've got two theories in mind. The first is that the staff just might not have thought the special was going to be any good, but I have no real evidence to support this idea. The second is that the special had a very rushed and troubled production, and the team had to scramble to pull it together. Scenario director Junichi Ioka once described the production process as slow to start, and once it did begin, only 3 months were given to animation. Possibly because of this constrained schedule, TMS outsourced animation work to numerous South Korean animation studios, Woo Lee Production for key animation, and Songsan and Dr. Movie for in-between animation. It could be that the team didn't exactly know how to get started with the story, though they did take inspiration from one recent event, the Gulf War, which had ended right around the time this began production. Japan was one of many countries that joined the coalition against Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, but many nations criticized them at the time for being too slow in taking action. Now, my knowledge of the Gulf War, especially from the Japanese perspective, is very limited, but given the circumstances and that notion of implied inferiority, I wouldn't be surprised if some on the team thought the international community was being unfair. Thus, we have a narrative centered partially around a political struggle between several nations of the world, all fighting against each other to take a treasure for themselves. And of course, Lupin gets caught up in it all as well. Despite the incredibly tight production schedule, Lupin III Napoleon's Dictionary premiered on August 9, 1991 on Nippon TV, the second of Lupin's features on the Friday Roadshow block.
辞書をめぐってなんと俺が世界中から狙われるドンパチカーレース謎解き忙しいルパン三世スペシャル第3弾ナポレオンの辞書を奪えよろしく
I've heard that the special wasn't received very well in Japan when it premiered, and even today, I can't say I've heard anybody sing this special's praises. Not that people call it outright terrible, but it seems like everyone forgets about this one. I personally remembered nothing from this special, barring a few details, and even then, I didn't remember that they were from this one, just that they happened. And after watching it again, I completely understand why, because Napoleon's Dictionary is extremely dull and unremarkable. Let's begin by talking about the story. Napoleon's Dictionary begins at a G7 conference following the end of the Gulf War, as the nations of the world are struggling to recoup their losses. One scholar recommends the nations seek out the fortunes of the Lupin Empire, left behind by Lupin III's ancestors, including his grandfather and father, which they all try to claim behind each other's backs. Meanwhile, Lupin meets up with Jigen in Scotland and informs him about an upcoming motor race as well as the grand prize, a dictionary owned by Napoleon Bonaparte that was stolen away by one of his ladies-in-waiting who eventually married Arsène Lupin. The dictionary then fell to his son, Lupin II, who used it to pay for his gambling debts, and the dictionary has been missing ever since until it turned up at the race. Lupin feels a sense of obligation to recover the dictionary and see what treasures its contents lead to, giving chase across Europe with other racers hot on their trail. Unlike the previous two specials, which featured more absurd and character-driven narratives, Napoleon's Dictionary is pure Lupin action from beginning to end. There's a few references to story details from the manga, such as the Lupin Empire, a network of treasures and operatives that has barely played into any of the anime adaptations. Then we have Napoleon's Dictionary itself, specifically the concept that the word impossible is not in the dictionary. That's an admittedly silly quote that manga Lupin occasionally invoked, and while it's a literal representation here, it does come from a quote of Napoleon himself, also translated to, impossible is a word only found in the dictionaries of fools, though this isn't a super accurate translation. That's all positioned alongside the Gulf War angle, which is interesting, but also doesn't matter in the slightest. It's the initial crux behind the nations of the world chasing after the Lupin Empire, but then this idea just kinda leaves the movie halfway through. And all we're left with, as far as antagonists, are two rogue CIA operatives who also don't impact the story all that much. And the thing is, the Gulf War plotline could have been pretty great if that was far more of a focus. I could almost give this special the benefit of the doubt as a commentary on military expenses following wartime and the ways countries recoup them in the aftermath, but the impact of the Gulf War has little to no relevance beyond the first 5 minutes, so, we can forget about that. The result is that the special is mostly a treasure hunt, following all the beats you expect and not going beyond the basics. I don't know about you, but I find that the premise this time just doesn't get you that invested at all. What I find critically missing is examining Lupin's family legacy and how this latest descendant of the line of thieves feels about his family's pride and collection being used like this. Lupin mentions his obligation to reclaim his family's treasure, but he doesn't really talk about it in any kind of meaningful way. I'd love to know why Lupin cares so much about what he admits is merely a book on the surface, and why he goes out of his way to protect his family's name. Lupin isn't a series known for being incredibly introspective, so I guess it's unfair to expect that, but it would have at least elevated the story and given us something interesting to chew on. So it's not a very deep story, and it really only has the typical Lupin elements going for it, so does Napoleon make up for those shortcomings with an entertaining story and good pacing? Absolutely not, because holy Christ, this TV special is slow as hell. Partially it's the stiff animation, which I'll get to in a minute, but again, the story also gives you barely any reason to care about the chase, and the whole thing moves at snail pace, which lets me bored and turned off only about a third of the way into it. A few scenes do at least provide some entertainment, with one really good scene between Zenigata and Lupin midway through, but moments like this are way too infrequent. Not even the cast of characters can pull the movie through its runtime, unfortunately. None of Lupin's typical traits are emphasized here, it's just Lupin acting without a real depth of character, and he's not particularly funny, intelligent, or goofy here. Jigen once again takes a subservient role, just kinda hanging around by Lupin's side for most of the adventure, and Goemon once again barely has any real arc to speak of. The two of them do at least have a brief adventure together, which is better than Fujiko, who operates separately from the group and has so little involvement in what's happening that she regrettably feels like a worthless addition here. But I will give this special credit for at least giving Zenigata a more dignified presence, even if he still isn't integrated into the story all that much. Once again, he's portrayed as unwillingly frugal and occasionally stealing from above his station, but it's not framed in a way that makes him look pathetic, but instead persevering in an unfair situation. And while he's still chasing Lupin, he understands that many of the superpowers seeking his family's treasures would use any means necessary to capture him, and wants to avoid that, showing his nobility and respect for Lupin. It isn't a major improvement, but it's a noteworthy one, and a welcome one all the same. And as for the one-off characters in Napoleon's dictionary, they're barely worth talking about. The Lupin girl this time is Chieko Kido, a National Security Bureau member who becomes Zenigata's partner, and even after watching this special 3 times for this video, I couldn't tell you anything special about her. Although I did learn that her voice actor, Keiko Toda, also starred as Hitomi from Cat's Eye, which, funnily enough, is getting a crossover movie with Lupin III next year. So that's a fun bit of relevance. For the villains, we've got Robert Hawke, a CIA operative tasked with hunting down Lupin, and Eric, a racer traveling with Fujiko who's also working with the CIA, both of whom eventually go rogue to get the Lupin Empire fortune. They're probably the most stock Lupin villains I've seen in the retrospective so far, the former being the big tough guy with plenty of guns and an army by his side, and the latter being the blandly attractive bachelor who's got a secret scheme going on. It's bad enough that they aren't very unique as characters, but they also exit the story so quickly in the finale that it feels like they're building up to nothing. It doesn't help that the characters don't look good in many of these shots, and that's thanks to the unpredictable animation rather than the actual designs. The characters were drawn by Masaki Kudo and are based primarily on Noboru Furusei's art from the previous 2 specials. For the most part, they're not too bad, if a little simple, about what you'd expect from early 90s anime Lupin. Notably, Yasuo Otsuka is also credited in this one for mechanical designs, and considering there's a lot of vintage cars here, his involvement is clear, and it lends a touch of that old Lupin charm in rendering its settings and objects. This is one of the last Lupin anime projects Otsuka had a major hand in before his passing in 2021, though he drew plenty of official artwork for the series afterwards, including DVD and Blu-ray boxes. But this special is another instance where the animation quality can rise and dip drastically in the blink of an eye. Given a longer production cycle and fewer animators working on the project, I'm sure Napoleon's Dictionary would have had more quality, but as it stands, the special is certainly hampered in the art department in a number of instances. And it's interesting how Tezaki's style seems very absent here. Maybe some lighting effects carry over, but the other visual and perspective effects from Bye Bye Lady Liberty and the Hemingway papers are absent. His style may not be for everyone, and some might have found it overbearing in the past two films, like myself sometimes, but I don't know, I kinda miss them now that they're gone. Napoleon's Dictionary doesn't look god-awful, I suppose, but the visuals are on the level of a TV show rather than a full-fledged TV movie, so if you're a stickler for good animation, avoid this one at all costs. And Yuji Ono's soundtrack doesn't help much as it's not spectacular in any real way. It's fine for underscoring the film, but there's no extraordinary pieces here either. And honestly, that's about all I can say about Napoleon's Dictionary because on the whole, it's just not interesting. It barely tries to elevate itself beyond what we expect, and even when it does, it discards what it's working with far too quickly. It's a very status quo Lupin in a way, and sometimes that can be appealing, almost a comfort when the series jumps off in wild directions and it doesn't work. But Napoleon's Dictionary is so by the numbers that it has little value to really appreciate, even as a hardcore Lupin fan. It feels like a mid-tier Part 2 episode stretched out to an hour-and-a-half runtime, and, in the process, made so tedious that it becomes a slog. There's maybe a few good bits here and there, but there's nothing in Napoleon's Dictionary that hasn't been done better elsewhere in the franchise. I'd say skip this one unless you're a Lupin completionist, it's not worth your time otherwise. Next up, we've got From Siberia with Love, another special I don't remember anything about, which does not make me excited to revisit it. But for now, if you enjoyed this video, then give it a like, leave a comment, and be sure to subscribe and click that bell to be notified when new videos go live. The next Lupin video is the last one of the year, and after that, Legacy of Lupin won't return until February. I'll hopefully be busy moving in January, and once I'm settled in, Lupin videos will return. Until next time, this is CloudConnection signing off.